Good afternoon. I'm Mark Elswig, Mark Elswig Company, Executive Recruiters. We've been working with financial advisors at wirehouses, regional and independent firms for the past 40 years. This is my 40th year, and we help advisors monetize their businesses, find the right firms, and in the last few years, succession planning has become a really big focus of ours too, understandably. So today, we're going to be discussing how to bulletproof the ownership of your business. How do you know that as a financial advisor, you really own your practice? Owning your practice, that is the hallmark, and if I might say, the glory of being a financial advisor. You can, whenever you want, you're able to transport your practice someplace else. As you approach retirement, you could designate another advisor or team to be your successor. And that's a type of freedom and control that really distinguishes a financial advisor from, a salaried employee who does not have the same control over their lives. But not all financial advisors really own their businesses, even people in the independent space. I'll just tell you something. As I was preparing this webinar, I spoke to an RIA friend of mine. He was in the process of hiring an advisor from a very well-known independent broker-dealer. And that advisor was shocked to find out that he really didn't have full control over his book, and his transition was kind of messy. And one of the purposes of this webinar is to make sure that none of our listeners are ever in that situation, that you really understand what it takes and what you have to do to make sure that you own your book. And toward that end, I'm delighted to have Corey Kupfer with us today. Corey is one of the most well-known and highly regarded attorneys in our industry. He's been in the industry for 35 years. You can go on Amazon and see his book, Authentic Negotiating. He also has a DealQuest podcast with over 300 episodes. And that's a podcast for entrepreneurs who want to build their businesses by making deals. So there's a lot to be learned there. So that's something you can just access right on the web. So Corey and I are going to chat for maybe, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. Then we'll open it up to Q&A. And Corey, I really want to thank you for being here to address this very timely and top of mind topic. And welcome. Thank you for coming.
Well,
Really
thanks for
appreciate it.
having me, Mark. And I appreciate being on in general, but I also particularly appreciate talking about this topic because it's a pet peeve of mine because I hate when we get involved when advisors are looking to transition. We've done hundreds and hundreds of transitions, and maybe we
Hmm.
weren't involved in the beginning, and they are shocked to find out that they don't have all the rights that they thought they had in terms of transferring their books and data. So it's a pet peeve of mine. So I love talking about this topic.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I guess my first question is, can you perhaps maybe share some examples of advisors who unexpectedly found themselves in this predicament?
Yeah, I mean, and and listen, we have, between what we have going on right now, and let's say even just in the last 6 months, we've had advisors on every end of the spectrum I'm about to talk about, right? So,
Hmm.
on the one hand, so let's talk about what it means to quote unquote own your book, right?
Hmm.
Because that's something
Yes.
that a lot of whether it's IBDs or other independent RA firms or other platforms or models say to advisors on the way in, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and what that can mean is very different things on very different models, right? So
Hmm.
the first thing that it usually means, at a minimum at least, is that you don't have any non-solicits or non-competes when you leave
Right.
from soliciting your
Hmm.
clients. Unlike, for example, at Morgan Stanley
Right.
or private banks or Goldman Sachs or whatever. Um,
Right.
However, there's much more involved than that. The first question is, on some of these
Hmm.
models, that's true, but it doesn't mean that the firm cannot also compete for the clients,
Mm.
right? So do you really own your clients if you have to compete for them when you leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does your agreement also say that the firm
Mm.
cannot solicit the clients to stay, actively solicit the clients to stay? There
Mm-hmm.
are many models that claim that you own your book, but the firm ends up competing for them.
Right.
So that's the first point. Now, thankfully, this is a relationship business, and even if that's the only issue, you know, the advisors are generally pretty successful in bringing over their clients, but they lose some, especially when the firm started maybe offering them. We have a situation right now where the firm is offering 50% discounts on fees to try to retain the
Wow.
book,
Wow.
right?
And that's in the independent space.
In the independent space.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Absolutely. So that's an example right now. And the client's like, wait a second, they're not supposed to be, well, I'm supposed to own my book. So why are they soliciting my clients and why are they offering them discounts to stay?
Right.
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 So that's, you know, that's like the first point.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, okay, so let's say you have the right, you know, you don't have any non-solicits and the firm's not going to compete for the clients. The next question is, um, what about the data, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Advisors make the assumption and sometimes are, you know, get direct representations from the sales folks, from the business development folks who bring them in the
Right.
first place. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
it's all fine. You'll be able to take everything when you leave. And you know what? A lot of them, a number of them find out. And when we review their legal agreements, they don't have everything in place to be able to
Mm.
properly do that, either by
Mm-hmm.
contract or by without violating the law.
I
So
see.
I don't know if we want to mention any specific places, but I mean, I will tell you that there's a lot going on with Ameriprise right now, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me
Mm-hmm.
make a contrast here between two known firms, and I'm not, you know, just as an example, right? Because there are many
Good.
others. Um, we have been working with Ameriprise advisors for years, for, you know, a long time. And for a decade, 15 years, whatever it's been, we've been telling people that practically Ameriprise lets you take your data, but when we look at their agreements and everything, privacy
Mm-hmm.
policy, I'll talk in detail about what needs to be in place, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
line up with your ability to take the data. Well, about 9 months
Ah,
ago, Ameriprise sort of woke up and suddenly has stopped people, stopped advisors from being able to take data, and they're suing
I
people.
see.
Okay.
Hmm.
On
Hmm.
the flip side, we found, for example, with Commonwealth, which is obviously right now very hot because of the LPL acquisition, uh,
Right.
they've been great. Um, they have they have everything in place. They have an offboarding team that's helping advisors leave and take their data. And they've
Mm-hmm.
been, you know, so that's just now there are 100 other firms that have various models of you know, you own your clients and you can take your data. And
Mm-hmm.
there are, you know, different, and I can get into details on what you should make sure you have in place because I'm happy to share that. Uh,
Yes, great.
but you know, but there is everywhere on the spectrum in between, let's say what Ameriprise has started doing in the last year and what Commonwealth, you know, is doing, which is really making it easy for folks to offboard if that's what they want to do.
Right. So it sounds like one of the things you're saying is that people need an attorney to carefully read their contracts because in the example of Ameriprise, even though it says you can take your data in one place, you're mentioning that other clauses, other privacy clauses in the contract don't support that.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, I
Hmm.
won't get too deep into the details of the legal interpretation of that particular contract, but let me say
Right.
in general what has to be in place, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not in place, for example, at Ameriprise, and they're not the only ones, right? There's plenty of
Right.
places where it's true. So,
Right.
number one, you have to have a right in your agreement as an advisor with the firm, right? Whether it's your IR
Mm-hmm.
agreement, your franchise agreement, your affiliation agreement, whatever it is, to be able to take client data. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, you know, the next question is when they say client data, what does that include? You want to be
Mm-hmm.
ideally very specific on everything that you can take.
Right.
But that's not enough. People, I mean, it's logical for an advisor to assume, wait a second, I have a provision in my contract with my employer or my platform or my affiliated, you know, corporate RIA or IBD, and it says I can
Mm-hmm.
take my client data. So I should be able to take my client data. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
problem. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is that under Reg SP and under state
Mm-hmm.
privacy rules, especially when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
personally identifiable information, right? Social
Mm-hmm.
security numbers, tax ID numbers, things like that.
Right.
You need client consent.
Right.
Even if the firm says you're good, and even if your contract says you're good, you need
Right.
client consent to be able to properly do that under
Right.
regulation, right?
Right.
So does the investment management agreement, does the client agreement between the firm, between the corporate RIA, IBD, whoever it is, and the client, have the client pre-consent to say, hey, when my advisor leaves,
Mm-hmm.
I consent to the data being going with the advisor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have
Mm-hmm.
situations where the contract between the advisor and the firm says they could take it, but the investment management agreement doesn't. The third piece is, does the firm's privacy policy have the right
Mm-hmm.
language to allow that
Mm-hmm.
data to go? Because even if the first two are in place, if the privacy policy doesn't line up, it's still a problem. And then
Right.
there's a fourth piece which says, even if the client did consent, if that client happens to be in a state where they have a right to opt out, did they ever, this is rare that it happens, but if
Mm-hmm.
they consented in, let's say, their investment management agreement, if they're in one of those states, they could have subsequently, in theory, sent a notice saying, I no longer consent to this. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
check whether there's any opt outs from any clients.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those four pieces need to be in place, and very often you find that only one or two or three, zero, is the question is there zero or is there four or is there something in between? And you
Mm-hmm.
have a problem if you don't have all four of those things in place.
Right. That's really how that's really interesting. So obviously a contract in advance needs to be scrutinized very thoroughly.
The contract, the standard investment management agreement, the privacy policy, all of that stuff. Like, so when we represent advisors incoming to any of these
Mm-hmm.
platforms,
Mm-hmm.
right? We make sure that we raise these issues. We make sure that things are in place, or at a minimum, if they're on a platform where they're not in place, we make sure at least the advisors are aware of that and that it's not going to be so easy to take their data. There's one other way that I want to mention
Mm-hmm.
if those things are
Mm-hmm.
not in place. Some of the models say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's say the client consent is not in place, right,
Mm-hmm.
in advance. Some of the
Mm-hmm.
models say, hey, if you give us 30 days notice, you can
Mm-hmm.
go to the clients at that time and get consent from them, right?
Oh.
So that
Mm-hmm.
works as well. It's not as ideal of having the pre-consent because you still have to go out, to clients at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
that could work as well, where you say, okay, and the platform's cooperative, and you go get
Mm-hmm.
consent during your notice period, so that everything is set up for when
Mm-hmm.
for when you leave, and you can take the consent, you take the data day one. On some of the models, although you could get client, so if you don't have that, you can get client consent after the fact. But the problem is, you are now
Mm-hmm.
transitioning clients over, and until the client consents and until the firm
Mm-hmm.
then subsequently sends you the data. And there's a whole
Mm-hmm.
other bucket I want to talk about that, about whether they
Mm-hmm.
will in the format and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, at a minimum, you don't have that data day one. So you
Mm-hmm.
don't have performance reporting data. You don't have their information on their trusts and certain entities and vehicles and whatever. So when you need to give clients advice during that period before you get the data, you're at a
Right.
disadvantage.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess that's interesting. I guess if even if you have a firm that has a 30-day notice period, I presume you also want that firm not to be soliciting your clients at that point, and
That's right.
that to be put
That
in
is right.
writing too.
That is right.
Yeah.
That is
How,
right.
and as a general rule, how is this a very prevalent industry problem, or is this limited to like a
It's
couple of firms?
it's much more prevalent than you would think.
Right.
It's
Hmm.
which is why it's a pet peeve of mine, because I hate when
Yeah.
advisors have a certain expectation that has
Yeah.
often been reinforced by the people who recruited them, right? Oh
Yeah.
yeah, don't worry about
Right.
it. You own your book, yeah.
Right.
And I'm not
Right.
saying that, I mean, there are some cases where there's been active misrepresentations, but a lot of times it's just sort of like a don't worry about it, you own your book, but there's not like, there's no detailed discussion of what that really means and how that affects data. So when advisors are shocked when they make an assumption,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they're shocked that they can't do what they thought they were going to do and what they feel like they were told, or at least, given the implication, right? Or not told they couldn't.
Hmm.
It's really
Hmm.
frustrating for advisors, and I hate when that happens.
Yeah. And especially when they're shocked because they're 1099 employees of an independent firm, and probably a lot of the business development people probably don't know. I would think many of them in good faith think this is an independent platform, and they just don't know the details.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So, like I said, there are some situations where there's been active misrepresentation, but in a lot of situations, it's exactly that. I don't know that the BDOs or the recruitment people or the independent salespeople, whatever you want to call them, I don't know that they fully
Hmm.
understand, the legal, the contract, the regulatory implications. They are just, told the model is that you own your book. So they may not
Right.
be knowingly misrepresenting anything. They just don't realize the implications either.
Yeah, exactly. When you negotiate with firms, do you find that they're receptive to changing contracts? Because I know, for example, wirehouses rarely change anything,
That's right. That's right. That's right.
right?
Well,
How do you
yeah, I
how do
mean,
you find it in the independent space?
yeah. So, it depends upon, there are some that when we raise the stuff, they will make the changes, right? Even though they don't
Right,
have that in their standard agreements.
right,
Um, but there are some that are not receptive. And then it really comes down to, does the advisor, is the advisor willing to accept the fact that when they leave, it's not going to be as easy, right? And they may make a different
right,
decision, or at least at a minimum, they're aware of it in advance, right? They're not shocked
right.
on the back end.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and then, there's this whole other piece that I want to make sure we cover on,
Good.
okay, let's say even all of that's in place. Okay, what does it mean that you can take your data? What
Mm-hmm.
format, like, can you do it blanket? Are they going to require clients to jump through hoops? And then what format do you get the data in? Can you
Mm,
download it? If you have a CRM or performance reporting system or something like
mm-hmm.
that, can you get your
Mm-hmm.
own license and version to it and just export the data directly into
Mm-hmm.
that? Or are they going to say, no, we gotta get direct requests from clients. We're only going to send it to the client. We're not going to send it to you, advisor. And by the way, we're going to send it in, you know, PDF format. Like we're
Mm.
not going to give you downloadable data.
I see. Right.
So that's
Right.
a
We're not going to
huge thing.
make it easy. Right. We're not going to make it easy for you. But are most of the independent firms protocol members? So does that
Not
have an
necess-
effect here?
not necessarily number one. There's a mix on
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the number two, even if so, okay, remember under the
Yes.
protocol allows you to take five pieces of information.
Right.
Just name, address, phone number, email, and account title. So
Yes.
even if they're on protocol, it doesn't answer the data issue
Mm.
because
I
the
see.
protocol only allows you to take those five pieces of information. No performance
Right.
reporting, no past history, no client files, no notes, no, information on their trusts or entities. The protocol doesn't help you with that.
Right. So if they are protocol members, I mean, could you put a separate agreement on data? Is that where that's what you would need to actually help you
100%.
get the data? Well,
100%.
that's okay. Well, that's a really eye-opening thing to know.
Yeah, it's a great question because again, people may assume if on the protocol that means that they can, okay, now I'm on the protocol, I'm good. Well, no,
Right.
and by the way, there's another thing about the protocol. The protocol, going back to our first point about whether the firm can also compete for the clients,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when just if you're on the protocol, it doesn't restrict the firm from competing for the clients. All it means is that if you have a
Right.
even if you have a non-solicit in your agreement, that if you
Mm-hmm.
go from a protocol firm to a protocol firm, whether that's another, independent contractor platform or model, or you're going fully
Right.
independent in your own RIA on your own ADV, that
Mm-hmm.
any restrictive covenants, non-solicits, do not apply if you go protocol to protocol. But it does not mean that your prior employer or platform can't compete for the clients, and it does not mean you have rights to take data beyond the five pieces of
Wow.
information.
Wow. So those are really important things, the ability of the firm to compete against you, whether they're going to deliver the data in a, easily usable form if the client agrees. So those are very important protections to have. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have actual, we have situations going on right now. Obviously, I can't disclose the client or the firm
Right.
because they're active.
Right.
But I mean, we have one situation right now where the firm is refusing to, even though we got consent from every client to take
Mhm.
their data. The firm is
Mhm.
refusing to send it to us. They're saying that they
Wow.
need to hear directly from the client, and they said, and they're not going to transfer it in, in electronic, easy, format. So we're fighting them on that. We have another situation currently,
Wow.
where the firm is despite the fact. I mean, and listen, this is something, I guess I'll say as well. Like, we have a situation right now where the firm is actually, there is a provision in the agreements that says that they won't compete for the clients, and they are.
Mhm.
So obviously, even if you have
Wow.
provisions, there's a risk that they're going to violate them, right? But obviously, you're in a much
Sure.
better shape. Now, this is a situation where there've been several acquisitions, and I'm now
Uh-huh.
dealing with the general counsel of the
Uh-huh. I
buyer
see.
firm, and
Right.
I am hoping that they, because of the acquisitions, were not fully aware of what the agreement said, or they're not aware of what the individual, firm people are doing here,
Mhm.
and that they're going to
Mhm.
say, "Oh, we better stop this." But I don't know yet.
Mhm.
So yeah, so there's a lot of variations of what happened here in these situations.
Yeah. And actually, one reason I think the points you're raising are so important is that aside from the fact that independent brokers assume they own everything and can take everything, independent advisors move a lot more than wirehouse advisors.
Well,
So
well,
even
well,
if
that's
you go
right.
to an IBD, it's not unlikely that you'll be moving to an RIA or moving to another one. So this is something that an independent advisor, someone going independent or someone who is independent, this is a situation they're very likely to face.
Yeah, and Mark, what's even, again, I keep saying this is a pet peeve of mine because I just hate when people are just shocked. Um,
Hmm.
a lot of times I'll hear, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this from an
Hmm.
advisor on a IBD platform who originally came from a wirehouse. And they were like,
Hmm.
"Corey, this is the whole reason I left the wire. Like, I dealt with this when I
Right.
left the wirehouse. I
Right.
thought, like this is great. I'm never going to have to deal with this again. Why am I having to deal with this again?" And I'm like, "Well,
Right.
because you didn't properly negotiate the provisions on the way into the IBD, and yes, maybe you don't have a non-compete like you did at Morgan Stanley, but
Hmm.
you did, but all these other things are not in place." And it's
Yeah.
very frustrating for them because they thought they were done with that when they dealt with,
Yeah.
their exit from,
Yeah.
from the wirehouse.
Well, that's one of the reasons they did it, to be done with that. So
That's
I
right,
can see that I
to
can
own
see
their clients.
why they're absolutely shocked. So I guess looking at it the other way, if you're an advisor and you're an independent advisor, what and how do you know that you truly own your book? What would be
Yeah,
the signs
yeah.
of that? What would show you that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, again, you mentioned it before. I'm not looking this to be a pitch for me, whether it's me or one of the other attorneys that you want to you want an attorney involved on your incoming deal, ideally, and then obviously if you didn't have
Hmm.
that, you want it. You need to get advice on the exit, and you want somebody. Listen, there's a pretty small universe of those of us who have done countless hundreds of these transitions, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'm not saying it's got to be me, but you want to work with an industry experienced attorney who's handled, who's seen it all, right? And there's only a
Hmm.
handful of us that are true. Don't work with your local counsel, no matter how great they are. They may be
Right.
phenomenal employment, counsel. They may be very familiar with restrictive covenants in general, but there's so many
Hmm.
nuances in this industry between the regulatory scheme, between the practicality of knowing which platforms
Hmm.
practically
Hmm.
do what. So
Hmm.
definitely get your advice to make sure all of these things are in place. And it's worth, listen, it's like the old was it Fram oil filter commercial, like, either you pay $10 for the filter now, or you pay hundreds of dollars for the engine job later. Like it's worth the investment, to avoid that frustration and get proper advice to make sure that you're in a position to be able to take everything in the format that ideally, would
Right.
be,
Right.
when you leave.
Well, I can second that because I can just tell you, I've had some bad experiences with people who use their brother-in-law, who's an attorney, who's going to do it for free, or their other attorney who does something else, who's going to read it. Because this is a very specialized industry, and as you say, unless you know the nuances, you can't really be effective. So I think that's that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So let me see. Just one other question, then I want to move maybe to the Q&A. Um, when people leave RIAs or leave an RIA or leave an independent broker dealer, are there different things that they need to know?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the general framework of the things we talked about can apply in any of the scenarios, right? Because
Hmm.
even, listen, we all know IBDs aren't all the same. They have all different models, right? You can be an
Right,
employee, you can be an independent contractor, you can own your book, you can not own your book, you can whatever.
right.
You can be on the Ameriprise has, the employee channel, the franchise, some of them have different models even within, their
Hmm.
platforms, and different agreements apply. Um,
Hmm.
and then, even in the independent space, there's so many models these days. So,
Right.
which is great. I mean, I love the fact that advisors have so many more options,
Hmm.
right?
Right. Right.
But understanding the implications and the legal rights of those options, if you want to exit, I don't know if we want to spend any time on this, but I'll tell you what's happening, especially at some of the independent firms, because they've become
Yes.
bigger in the platforms, is that um, on some of these models, right, advisors have a chance to get an equity class, right? So some
Hmm.
sort of,
Yes.
whatever, some sort of equity.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Hmm.
which is great. One of the things you have to keep in mind, however, is that often that equity, right? So you may not have, maybe you have restrictions on the employee side or not, but
Hmm.
in that agreement you signed for the equity, right? In the operating agreement,
Hmm.
shares agreement, or whatever the agreement is that you sign in connection with the
Hmm.
equity, there could be
Hmm.
restrictions in that.
Right.
And courts are more likely to enforce restrictions if you are an owner, if you have equity. I mean, if it's some tiny minuscule piece, usually not. But like, if you get any kind of material equity, it
Uh-huh.
is much more likely for a firm to be able to enforce restrictive covenants, non-solicits, things like that. So if
Oh.
you're getting equity, which is a great opportunity often on some of these platforms, you want to make sure, what am I committing to? What restrictions am I agreeing to in connection with that equity
Hmm.
as well?
Yeah, that's a good point because more and more the models involve getting some kind of equity in a firm. That's an important thing to really scope out.
Yes.
Um, and I guess just a general question, although I think you've covered it somewhat, in terms of if you want to have a smooth and legally compliant exit. I mean, are there other things? Obviously, you need someone to read your, good legal representation, but what other
Yeah.
things might an
Yeah.
advisor think about?
Yeah, I think, listen, I mean, and this is stuff that's not, you're not going to cover everything in the contract. The question is, one of the questions
Mm-hmm.
is, and when you're joining a firm, sometimes it's difficult, but, I would try, if you can, I would try to find, and the great thing is you can look on IAPD or Broker Check, right? Whatever.
Right.
Try to find some advisors who've transitioned off that platform that you're about to join, and
Mm-hmm.
ask them about, if they're willing to talk to you, if you can get in touch with them, you reach out. I mean, fortunately, it's publicly available data, unlike in other places, right?
Right.
You can search for it. I would ask them what their exit experience, was, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
even totally outside any of these legal restrictions and the legal rights to take data, whatever, I mean, there are a
Mm-hmm.
million ways a firm can make it easy or not easy to,
Right.
transition, right? To make it smooth with clients, to not delay
Right.
in honoring ACATs, or transferring you the data, or the client, or even cooperating, right? Because here's the thing: the existing firm that, employer or platform or, affiliation that you're on, they
Mm-hmm.
have an
Mm-hmm.
obligation, they have a legal obligation to continue to service the clients until they transition, right? They have to
Mm-hmm.
reassign those accounts. Like, even if they're not going to solicit or anything, they
Mm-hmm.
have to
Mm-hmm.
reassign those accounts to an advisor, because, you may not, if you're in a model where you give advance notice and you get all the paperwork in advance, okay, that's one thing. But if you're not in that model, or there are any lagging clients, right, who have not, signed
Mm-hmm.
paperwork to transfer the account, the existing
Mm-hmm.
firm has an ethical, fiduciary, right, legal obligation, regulatory obligation, to continue to service those clients for whatever time period, even if it's a week, right,
Right.
that they're still, or a month, that they're still on the platform. So they have to reassign the account to another advisor. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not in violation of the agreements. That's their ethical
Right.
obligation, and legal obligation. So,
Understood.
so then the question is, okay, if that client needs something, right? They call up, they want to make a trade, or they want to pull money out because they're, buying a business
Mm-hmm.
or closing on a house or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the firm going to be practically cooperative with you? Are they going to let you be in conversation with whoever's handling the account there, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
the client's probably going to call you, even though you technically, as the advisor, even though you technically don't have the account yet, right? So
Right.
are they going to, so those are kind of things that you can't regulate in agreement. So understanding, speaking to people who have practical experience on transitioning off that model and finding out what their experience was. What was the offboarding team, of quality? Were they responsive? What was the, advisors handling the account temporarily willing to work with you? Did they put any roadblocks up or, or delays, or were you unable to get in contact with them? Those are all things that, the lawyers can't build into the agreement. It's just, so doing practical due diligence on that is something I'd advise.
No, it's a great idea. And it also means you have to have a feeling that you're dealing with solid, reputable, ethical people,
Yes,
because you can't get everything into a legal agreement. So you
100%,
have to choose to partner with the right kinds of people. If
100%.
I would think. So let me go to a Q and A here. I think we have someone here. Um, Says here, you should be careful before you join the firm, but what if you're already at the firm? Can you renegotiate? Can you fix your situation? That's our first question.
It's a great question. I mean, listen, I would encourage every advisor who's listening to this to try to look at where they do stand, and then at least
Mm-hmm.
make an attempt. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Listen, it is possible. There are firms that might
Mm-hmm.
do that. Listen, especially if they value having you there, right? They're making good money off you, or they like having you on the
Mm-hmm.
platform, and they think if
Mm-hmm.
they don't satisfy, you're going to leave. Having said that, obviously you've lost leverage. You have much more leverage when they're recruiting you
Right.
and they want you to
Right.
join, and you may
Right.
not join at all. You may go to somewhere, one of their competitors. It's
Right.
certainly the better time. But if you're in that position already where you're there, I would certainly encourage you to look into this, and if things aren't in place, at least make an attempt, to negotiate that, or at least at a minimum, listen. Even if you can't renegotiate it, like understand now where you stand, so that
Right.
because
Right.
if you are going to leave in a year or two or 5 years, whatever it is, if you understand now where you stand, there may be some strategies or at least awareness, and planning you can do so that you're not shocked on the back end, right? So at least,
Right.
at a minimum,
Right.
it makes sense to evaluate where you are today, just to have a better plan and understanding. But I think it's worth trying to negotiate. I think in some cases you may be successful, and in some cases you won't, because it's past the time when you really have your leverage.
Right. But understanding your situation on the way in should be part of your decision-making process
No question.
to make sure you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, no question. But listen, like, if the question is, hey, I'm already on this platform and you haven't done that, well,
Right.
figure out where you stand today, even if, and try to negotiate it. Even if you can't negotiate it, at least know. So you're not
Mm-hmm.
shocked when the time comes and you can plan accordingly.
Right. Yeah, shocked is a bad place to be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So I would agree with that. Let's see. Another question on let's say, what if I signed something, an agreement years ago, and I'm not sure what the contract is, I don't
yeah,
remember.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, I've had that question too. What does someone do in
Yeah,
that case?
that certainly comes up. Listen, I'm not saying we have this for every, there's so many variations of platforms out there, but
Mm-hmm.
one of the other benefits of going to counsel who's super experienced and done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of transition, like we have and some others in the industry have, is that I assume, our other attorneys do this, but like we have a database, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
anytime we do a transition with an advisor as a copy of their agreement,
Mm-hmm.
we look, what is the firm, what is the year,
Mm-hmm.
and we put it in our database. So in the inevitable
Mm-hmm.
time where, we have many situations where somebody says, I don't
Uh,
have a copy of my agreement, we say, okay, you're coming
mm-hmm.
out of Morgan Stanley, if it's a wirehouse or Ameriprise or
Right.
LPL or whatever it is. Uh, we can look and see, and you join them in, 2018, right? We can look and see whether we have an agreement from that firm from that year. Now, that
That's
obviously
great.
doesn't guarantee, like we always have
Right.
to have an asterisk to say, well, it doesn't guarantee you have the same exact agreement. But usually at
Mm-hmm.
most of these firms, right, the agreements are pretty
Right.
standard for everybody
Right.
coming in, at least during that period of time until they update their form.
Right.
So we have
Yeah.
a reasonable level of confidence if we have an agreement from that time period from that firm, that's likely the same as what you signed. Now, if we don't have, and obviously we're more likely to have that for a wirehouse or some of the big IBDs, if it's some, you know, regional bank
Right,
or at some, local RA firm, it's much less likely we have something. And in
right.
that case, it is more challenging. We need to move forward based upon, I mean, and listen, we have a lot of industry contacts, so we'll ask around if it's a firm, does anybody have experience, with it? We'll try to gather
Mm-hmm.
information for the client. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then, obviously there are in some situations, like at a wirehouse, you're never going to want to go ask for your for a
No,
copy of your agreement. But there are
no.
some situations, that it may make sense, especially, very often it doesn't, but there's some situations that it may make sense to, and we have strategies on why you might ask for a
Mm-hmm.
copy of your agreement without making it clear that you're leaving or something.
Right.
Um, but yeah, sometimes we have to advise with no agreements in place, and we have to say, hey, listen, what do you remember? This is, and that's a challenging situation. So, I mean, for any of you who are making a move, especially in this electronic day and age, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, make sure you have that contract somewhere. You're in
Yeah,
much better shape if you do.
yeah. Yeah, I always tell people to scan it, not to put it in a drawer.
Mhm.
Scan it so you have a permanent
Yep.
record of it because it's
Yes.
really important. But that's a good strategy. Here's another one. I'm part of a team. Let's see. I'm not sure that the other team members are gonna want to leave, but I want
Yep.
to leave.
Yep.
Uh, how do I handle that?
Yeah,
That's a
so
tough
so
one.
so there's a couple of things on that. First of all, being part of a team may very well affect your legal rights. So in other words, you may have a right,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, to take
Mm-hmm.
your clients, but there's a carve out for team clients, right?
Yes.
Just as an example, under the protocol, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which said basically the protocol says, hey, if you follow the protocol, even if you have a non-solicit, right, you can solicit. Well, there's a carve out under the protocol for team agreements. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing is if there's a written team agreement, you got to look, obviously you have to have an attorney and have the attorney look at what the team agreement says, because the team agreement may have very specific provisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And often there's a distinction between, okay, did you bring the client to the team, right? Or did someone
Mm-hmm.
else bring the client to the team?
Right.
So you have to separately evaluate the team arrangement. And also, there's a distinction. Some people, is there an actual team and team agreement, or is it just the joint rep code, right?
Right.
A joint production code, right? Because those are different.
Mm-hmm.
If there's just a split, but there's no agreement, then usually it's not an issue. But if there's a true team and team agreement in place, you've got to
Mm-hmm.
have somebody evaluate how that impacts your right to take clients and data.
Right. So that's part of the puzzle too.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think we've covered like a lot. You gave us like you really packed in the information in a relatively short amount of time. I think we've covered a lot of really good stuff. I mean, in other words, things that you have to really know in advance that are in the agreement and where you have to have a competent attorney really scrutinize things and negotiate on your behalf. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I think we pretty much I think you really gave us some great information. So unless maybe we'll wrap up unless there's something that you want to add that somehow didn't come up in our conversation thus far.
No, I mean nothing's the one thing I would say is this,
Mm-hmm.
having done my first advisor transition 27, 28 years ago, right? Before there was really
Wow.
a full independent advisor movement or an ecosystem or whatever, and having done transitions for the last 27 years and obviously the last
Mm-hmm.
15 years especially, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and how the industry has matured and evolved as an advisor, you have so many options out there now, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
so many
Mm-hmm.
different models, so many different platforms. Everybody's looking to grow. Everybody's looking to, so you are in a good leverage position, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
don't, like you have the ability to try to negotiate this stuff, get the right, counsel and advice in place. And you always have another alternative if that platform is not, if you are aware now of what we talked about. The great news is that if you find that there's a platform you're looking at and they don't have these right things in place, there's always another option out there these days. It's not,
Yeah,
it's a whole different ballgame than it used to be.
absolutely. And it seems every year. They're actually, new, well-financed, some backed by PE, like new players coming into the business,
No,
offering, variation, different business models. And it's one thing I always try to make sure that I'm on top of to figure out which ones are, right for who and which ones are not good. But I think that's the right point, that the opportunity set has never been broader. And so good advisors should realize that as they're talking to prospective firms.
no question. And listen, we help design some of these new platforms. Like in addition to this transition stuff, we do a
Hmm.
lot of launching and designing of just independent RA firms, but also new platforms and models. We do a lot of M&A in the space. So, we're actively now, I mean, I won't mention names. There's some that have gone public that have launched and whatever. But we're involved, like, I mean, we see just in what we do several new, things, about to come online. So it's
Right.
only going to continue to increase the options that advisors have, which is a wonderful thing.
It really is. So Corey, listen, thank you very much. You gave us a fantastic amount of information in a short period of time. I know I got a lot out of the webinar as well. And I really thank you for being here. And to our listeners, in the next couple of days, I'll get out the recording so everybody can watch it again at their leisure. Corey, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to provide some value and get to talk about one of my pet peeves in the industry.
Thank you so much, Corey. Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.